You know what's strange? We spend so much time arguing about generations that get all the attention. Boomers are blamed for everything. Millennials are analyzed to death. Gen Z is treated like a brand new species we're trying to decode in real time. But right in the middle of all that noise, there's an entire generation that barely gets mentioned at all. Not celebrated. Not criticized. Just quietly overlooked. Generation X, born roughly between 1965 and 1980. They're your older coworkers who don't complain. Your parents who seem oddly calm or emotionally distant. The people who helped build the modern internet but don't feel the need to document their lives online. And here's the thing most people don't realize, their psychology might be the most misunderstood of any living generation. They grew up in a world that trained them, very early, to expect less help and more consequences. Generation X was the first generation to experience being left alone on a massive scale. Not as a rare situation, but as a normal part of daily life. Picture being 8 years old in the late 1970s. You come home from school and the house is empty because both parents are working. There's no phone in your pocket. No camera at the door. No way for anyone to check if you made it home safely. You let yourself in, make something to eat, do your homework alone, and wait. Not for entertainment. Not for attention. Just wait. Millions of children lived like this every single day. And that empty house did more than teach independence. It taught a deeper lesson: you can't always rely on someone being there. When something goes wrong, you might have to deal with it yourself. That belief settles in quietly, but it stays for life. It also changes how you understand responsibility. In that world, actions had immediate and unavoidable consequences. If you messed up, there was no long conversation about feelings. No delayed response. No negotiation. When parents came home, you knew exactly where you stood. The rules were clear, firm, and enforced. Step out of line, and the result came quickly. Psychologically, this created what researchers describe as an environment where actions and outcomes were tightly connected, with almost no buffer time. Your brain learned to predict consequences before acting. Over time, that turned into a habit of thinking ahead, planning for outcomes, and anticipating problems before they happen. That's why Generation X often seems like they're thinking 3 steps ahead, especially compared to younger generations who grew up with more safety nets. It's not that Gen X is naturally cautious. They were trained to be. They also grew up watching the idea of stability slowly fall apart. As kids, they heard adults talk confidently about hard work, loyalty, and long-term security. Then they watched divorce rates climb through the 1970s and 1980s. They watched people give decades of their lives to companies, only to be laid off when corporate priorities shifted. They were told that following the rules would lead to a good life, and then they watched the rules change in real time. That experience leaves a mark. So when psychologists label Generation X as pessimistic, Gen X doesn't see it that way. To them, it's realism. They're not expecting disaster, but they're never surprised by it either. This is where their emotional armor comes from. They hope for good outcomes, but they quietly prepare for disappointment. Not because they enjoy negativity, but because experience taught them that things can fall apart without warning. And that mindset explains a lot about why they behave the way they do today, especially online. Generation X didn't grow up sharing their lives publicly. Privacy wasn't a concept. It was just how life worked. If you embarrassed yourself as a kid, maybe a few people knew. And then it passed. There were no permanent records. No viral moments. Just awkward memories that stayed local. So the idea of broadcasting personal details to strangers doesn't feel exciting to them. It feels dangerous. This isn't about not understanding technology. They understand it very well. It's about learning early that the less people know about you, the safer you tend to be. Visibility, in their worldview, comes with risk. That's why they're quieter online. That's why they don't overshare. And that's why their absence from social media often gets mistaken for irrelevance, when it's really intentional distance. They also developed a unique emotional style. Humor, irony, and sarcasm became tools. Not just for entertainment, but for protection. Making a joke before something hurts gives you control over the moment. Keeping things light keeps people at arm's length. That habit didn't come out of nowhere. Generation X grew up during the Cold War, when teachers practiced nuclear drills with children as if hiding under a desk could save them. Adults talked about global destruction like it was just another possibility, while insisting everything was fine and there was nothing to worry about. Growing up in that contradiction trains you to hold two opposing ideas at the same time. Danger is real, but panic is useless. So you learn to detach just enough to function. Despite all of this, Generation X developed a work ethic that still stands out today. And the most noticeable thing about it is that they don't talk about it. They don't post motivational quotes. They don't announce their hustle. They just work. That attitude was shaped early, through jobs that feel almost ancient now. Delivering newspapers before sunrise. Bagging groceries. Working fast food counters where you had to calculate change in your head when machines failed. These jobs weren't about building resumes or finding passion. They were about responsibility. About showing up. About understanding that even small roles matter because other people depend on you. They watched their parents' generation get damaged by corporate restructuring, downsizing, and broken promises. So they never believed in company loyalty. Instead, they became loyal to their own competence. They know they can't control whether a company survives or whether leadership makes good decisions. But they can control whether they're useful. Whether they know how things work. Whether they can solve problems when things go wrong. Their security comes from skill, not titles. There's a paradox at the center of Generation X psychology that often gets missed. They're one of the most independent generations, but also one of the most quietly collaborative. They rarely ask for help. They're used to figuring things out on their own. They've been doing it since childhood. But if someone else needs help, they show up. No announcement. No expectation of praise. Just action. That behavior comes from friendships formed out of necessity, when parents were absent and peers became your support system. Their relationship with authority is complicated, and deeply shaped by history. Generation X respects competence, not hierarchy. If you know what you're doing, they'll follow you without question. If you're in a position of power but lack skill, they have very little patience. They grew up watching authority figures fail repeatedly. Political scandals, public health crises, economic mismanagement. They learned early that titles don't guarantee wisdom. So they question authority, not out of rebellion, but out of experience. Economically, they were hit from multiple directions. The oldest members of Generation X were establishing their careers when major financial instability struck. The youngest graduated into a collapsing job market after the dot-com bubble burst. Many were just finding stability when the 2008 financial crisis hit. Repeated economic shocks leave lasting psychological effects. That's why many Gen Zers maintain multiple income streams or backup plans. Not because they're obsessed with growth, but because they've learned that nothing is permanent. This constant self-reliance comes at a cost. Research shows that Generation X is less likely to seek social support during periods of stress. Not because they don't have people they trust, but because asking for help feels uncomfortable. It feels like failure. They're excellent in crisis situations, but that competence often hides unspoken anxiety. They carry responsibility quietly, even when it's heavy. Their relationship with knowledge is also different. Before the internet, information wasn't instant. It required effort. Time in libraries. Searching through physical systems. Waiting. That effort gave information weight. What you learned stuck with you because you worked for it. Cognitive research suggests that effortful learning leads to deeper memory encoding, and Generation X is a perfect example of that. They also learn to fix things themselves. When something broke, you didn't immediately replace it or call for help. You tried to understand it. That built a belief that the world was understandable, and problems were solvable with patience and effort. Now they're watching their children grow up in a very different environment. One with constant supervision, instant answers, and permanent visibility. They gave their kids the attention they didn't receive. But sometimes they worry they've gone too far. That comfort and protection might come at the cost of resilience. Because in the Gen X mindset, being visible means being exposed. And exposure feels risky. The truth is, Generation X isn't better than other generations. They're not worse either. They're different. Shaped by a specific moment in history when the old systems were breaking down and the new ones hadn't fully formed yet. They're the bridge between worlds. And bridges don't draw attention to themselves. They just hold weight. They connect things. They stay solid while others pass over them. And maybe that's the most Generation X thing of all. Doing the work. Holding things together. And not caring whether anyone notices.